They dared her to call for backup, thinking she was standing alone. As the security guards closed in to drag her out, Avery calmly connected her phone to the firm's massive digital display. When the flickering feed stabilized, the most powerful woman in the industry was staring back, and she wasn't smiling at the CEO. In 60 seconds, the hunter became the prey, and the room realized that the quiet analyst had just walked them all into a trap. If you love stories where the underdog finally strikes back, subscribe and hit the bell. Now let's go back to where the silence first broke in that Chicago tower. The 16th floor was unusually quiet for a Tuesday morning, but the tension in the air was thick enough to feel. Avery Collins stood by the window of the glass tower, looking out at the gray, churning waters of Lake Michigan, though she wasn't really seeing the view. In her hand, her phone felt heavy, a silent weight that held the power to either solidify her career or end it permanently. She had been a senior risk analyst for long enough to know when numbers were being massaged, but what she had found in the Project Horizon files wasn't just a massage. It was a total reconstruction of reality. For weeks, Avery had been living a double life. By day, she sat in departmental meetings, nodding as Dominic Vale, the chief investment officer, spoke about record-breaking returns and aggressive expansion. By night, she was sending encrypted files to Margaret Halston, the chair of the board, and a specialized team of outside counsel linked to federal regulators. They had told her to wait for the right moment, the moment when the commitment was final and the deception was public. That moment was now. As she turned away from the window, she saw Dominic walking toward the boardroom, flanked by his usual circle of protective managers. He was laughing, his silver hair catching the light, looking every bit the visionary leader the industry believed him to be. He didn't even look at Avery as he passed, treating her like part of the scenery, just another analyst there to provide the technical backdrop for his performance. Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere was electric. Representatives from State Street and Fidelity were already seated, their notebooks open, their eyes fixed on the large screen at the front of the room. These were people who didn't gamble. They invested based on trust and data. Dominic took his place at the head of the table, exuding a confidence that made the air in the room feel thin. He began his presentation, his voice smooth and practiced, painting a picture of a real estate portfolio that seemed too good to be true. Avery took her seat near the back, her heart hammering against her ribs. She checked her phone one last time. A single message from Margaret was waiting for her. "We are on standby. Signal when the validation is signed." Dominic was now showing a slide of projected occupancy rates, numbers Avery knew had been inflated by nearly 40% through a series of shell entities. The investors were nodding, some of them already reaching for their pens to sign the preliminary approval. Dominic paused for effect, looking around the room with a smile that was meant to be reassuring, but felt like a predatory grin to Avery. "As you can see," he said, gesturing to the glowing charts, "the risk is minimal, and the upside is unprecedented." A wave of polite applause broke out. Dominic basked in it, leaning back as if the deal was already closed. He looked toward the investors, then back toward his team, his eyes finally landing on Avery with a flick of impatience. He expected her to step up and provide the final technical blessing for the report. Instead, Avery stayed seated, her hands clasped tightly on top of her folder, knowing that the trap was set and the entire room was about to find out exactly who had been playing whom. Dominic was halfway through a slide detailing the projected cash flow for the luxury redevelopment when Avery leaned forward. The room was still nodding along to his description of unparalleled growth, but the math on the screen didn't match the reality of the internal risk files she had spent weeks deconstructing. She didn't wait for him to finish his sentence. "Dominic, we need to pause on the valuation assumptions for the Northside Holdings," Avery said. Her voice wasn't loud, but in the sterile quiet of the room, it cut through his momentum like a physical barrier. Dominic stopped mid-gesture. He didn't turn around immediately. He let the silence hang for a few seconds, a calculated move to show the investors that he had been interrupted. When he finally looked at her, his expression was one of amused tolerance. "Avery, we're in the middle of a high-level summary for our partners from State Street. I'm sure your technical questions can wait for the debrief." "They can't," Avery replied, keeping her eyes fixed on the projection. "The yield projections are anchored to a holding entity called Blue Anchor Delta. That entity isn't a standard subsidiary. It's an offshore structure with zero verified operating history, and it's carrying nearly 60% of the project's debt off balance sheet. If we move to sign off today, we are effectively certifying a void." The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. One of the lead investors from Fidelity adjusted his glasses, his eyes darting from Avery to the screen. The polite, rehearsed energy of the meeting evaporated, replaced by the sharp, cold alertness of people who realized their money might be at risk. Dominic's smile didn't falter, but his eyes hardened. He walked away from the screen, closing the distance between them. "This is exactly what I mean when I talk about the gap between raw data and executive strategy," he said, directed more at the investors than at her. "Avery is a brilliant analyst, but she often gets lost in the weeds of accounting minutiae. Blue Anchor is a strategic vehicle designed for tax efficiency and long-term asset shielding. It's a standard play in a redevelopment of this scale." "Tax efficiency is one thing," Avery countered, her tone remaining flat and professional. "But the occupancy rates being used to justify the valuation of that specific asset have been inflated by 40%. The contracts listed as committed are actually non-binding letters of intent with no earnest money deposited. We aren't shielding an asset, we're hiding a deficit." Dominic laughed then. It was a sharp, condescending sound designed to make her look hysterical or out of her depth. "Avery, I think you've spent too many late nights staring at spreadsheets and not enough time understanding how these deals are structured at the top. You're questioning a strategic direction that has already been vetted by the senior partners. To bring up these inconsistencies now in front of our clients suggests you either don't understand the business or you're intentionally trying to sabotage the firm's most important launch of the decade." He turned back to the investors, spreading his hands. "I apologize for the distraction. Sometimes our more junior staff struggle with the transition from technical support to strategic partnership. We'll address this internally. Now, if we could return to the exit strategy." Avery didn't back down. She knew that if she stayed silent now, the deal would close, the fraud would be buried, and she would be the one blamed when it eventually collapsed. She reached into her blazer and felt the cold glass of her phone. The moment had arrived. "I'm not struggling with a transition, Dominic. I'm doing my job. And the board is very interested in the definition of strategic partnership you're using today." Dominic's jaw tightened. The theater of the friendly mentor was over. He looked at the two associates near the door and gave a sharp, almost imperceptible nod. "Avery, you're clearly not yourself. I think it's best if you hand over your materials and leave the room. We'll discuss your future with the firm on Monday." Dominic's nod to the security team was the final signal. He didn't want a debate, he wanted a removal. The two men in dark suits stepped forward, their presence intended to intimidate Avery into a quiet, shameful exit. The investors shifted in their seats, some looking away to avoid the awkwardness of a career being destroyed in real time. Dominic leaned over the table, his voice a low, dangerous silk. "Give them your badge, Avery. Don't make this harder than it already is." Avery didn't look at the security guards. She didn't reach for her badge. Instead, she tapped a final command on her phone and swiped upward toward the room's central console. "I'm not making a call for help, Dominic. I'm making a report." The massive digital display behind Dominic, which had been showing the fraudulent occupancy charts, suddenly flickered and went black. A split second later, the system speakers chimed with the distinctive alert of an incoming high-priority video conference. The screen didn't show a dial pad or a contact list. It opened directly into a live feed of a sterile, brightly lit conference room in Boston. Dominic froze. He was still leaning toward Avery, but his body went rigid as he recognized the woman on the screen. It was Margaret Halston, the chair of the board, and she wasn't alone. Seated next to her were two men Avery had been speaking with for weeks, outside regulatory counsel with deep ties to the SEC. The room went completely silent. The security guard stopped mid-step, looking at Dominic for instructions he was no longer capable of giving. The laughter that had been bubbling in the back of the room died instantly. "Mr. Vale," Margaret said, her voice amplified through the boardroom's surround system. She didn't look angry, she looked deeply disappointed, which was far more terrifying. "I suggest you take a seat. We have been watching this presentation via Ms. Collins's secure link for the last 20 minutes. Dominic's face went from a flush of anger to a pale, sickly gray. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked. "Margaret, I can explain the structure. This is a misunderstanding of the preliminary data." "It is not a misunderstanding," Margaret interrupted, her eyes moving to the investors from State Street and Fidelity. "Gentlemen, I apologize for what you've just witnessed. The board was alerted to these discrepancies by Ms. Collins 30 days ago. We requested she remain in place to document the extent of the internal pressure being applied to bypass our risk protocols. We have seen enough. The power in the room shifted so violently it was almost physical. Every head turned away from Dominic and toward Avery. She remained standing, her expression unchanged, the phone still in her hand. She wasn't the emotional or confused analyst anymore. She was the only person in the room with the authority of the truth. Margaret continued, her gaze returning to Dominic. Dominic, your access to all firm systems was revoked 5 minutes ago. Security is there to escort you out, but not for Ms. Collins. They are there for you. We will be conducting a full forensic audit of the Northside holdings, and the SEC counsel present will be overseeing the preservation of all your communications. Avery watched as the man who had tried to crush her 5 minutes ago sank into his chair, his eyes fixed on the floor. The investors were already standing up, not to leave, but to distance themselves from the wreckage of Dominic's career. The room was no longer his theater, it was Avery's office. Dominic tried to stand, but his legs seemed to fail him. He sat back down heavily, his gaze fixed on the screen where Margaret Halston remained, her face a mask of cold professional resolve. The room was silent, save for the hum of the air conditioning and the soft tap of Avery's fingers on her phone as she swiped to the next set of documents. If you look at the secondary display, Avery said, her voice steady and devoid of triumph, you'll see the internal directive sent from Mr. Vale's private server to the compliance floor 3 weeks ago. A series of emails appeared on the wall. They weren't complex or technical, they were blunt. In them, Dominic explicitly instructed the risk team to re-index the occupancy data to meet investor expectations, threatening that anyone who flagged the discrepancy would be seen as not a team player. Below the emails were bank transfer logs, evidence of the offshore fees paid to the shell entities Avery had identified earlier. Dominic's confidence didn't just break, it evaporated. He looked around the table at the investors he had been charming moments ago. They weren't looking at him with anger yet. They were looking at him with a clinical, detached sort of disgust. To them, he was no longer a visionary, he was a liability. The security team, taking their cues from the screen, stepped toward the head of the table. There were no handcuffs, no dramatic shouting. It was a corporate extraction. One guard placed a hand on the back of Dominic's chair. Mr. Vale, we need to clear your desk and escort you from the building. Now. Dominic didn't argue. He left his leather portfolio on the table, a final piece of abandoned property, and walked out between the two guards. The door clicked shut, and the heavy tension in the room began to dissipate, replaced by a frantic energy as the investors realized they had almost walked into a trap. Margaret spoke again from the screen. Avery, the board has already met. We are initiating an independent audit of every fund currently under management. We are also creating a new ethics and risk governance committee that reports directly to us, not the CIO. We want you to head that committee, effective immediately. In the weeks that followed, the firm changed. The culture of winning at all costs was dismantled piece by piece. It wasn't a transformation that happened overnight with a speech or a mission statement. It happened in small, quiet moments, in meetings where analysts were encouraged to flag errors, and in the way the data was triple verified before it ever reached an investor's hands. Avery didn't seek the spotlight. She stayed in her office on the 16th floor, her view of Lake Michigan unchanged, though her responsibilities had shifted entirely. She knew that the same people who had laughed at her call that morning were now the ones double-checking their work before they brought it to her desk. She hadn't just saved the firm's money, she had forced it to have a conscience. The humiliation Dominic had planned for her had become the foundation of a new kind of power, one based on the truth instead of the performance. In the high-stakes world of corporate power, Avery Collins proved that integrity is the only currency that truly matters. She didn't just save a firm, she redefined what it means to lead. Today, the glass tower still stands, but the culture inside has changed forever. It serves as a reminder that the loudest voice in the room isn't always the right one, and sometimes the most analytical person is the one keeping the whole ship from sinking. If this story resonated with you, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into corporate strategy and stories of justice. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.
Thank you for seeing us.